2.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the February 9th meeting of the Northampton Policing Review Commission. This is our full commission meeting. We'll be going from 6 to 8 tonight. This is a remote meeting. It's being held in Zoom, and it's also being recorded and will be up on the Northampton Open Media site or YouTube channel after the meeting. Our first piece of business is to just do a quick roll call. Noah, can you call us off?
Yeah. Booker.
Here.
Dan.
Here.
Nick.
Here.
David.
Here.
Alex.
Here.
Javier.
Here.
Namdi.
Here.
Michael.
Here.
Josie.
Here.
Cynthia.
Here.
And Carol and Chris won't be joining us today.
Awesome. So the next on our agenda is to approve the minutes that were sent out earlier. Has everyone had a chance to read those? And does anyone have any changes to those minutes?
Move to approve then?
All right.
Second.
Awesome. Noah, can you count us off again to approve the minutes?
Yeah. And I forgot Elizabeth. I'm so sorry, who I think is not here yet. But I will call it again. Booker.
Yes.
Dan.
Yep.
Nick.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Alex.
Yes.
Javier.
Yes.
Andy.
Yeah, yes.
Michael.
Yes.
Josie.
Yes.
Cynthia.
Yes.
And Elizabeth is not here. Okay, thank you.
All right. So we'll get started and we'll roll right into the next agenda item, which is public comment. Public comment will be 15 minutes. You'll have 3 minutes to make your public comment. If you don't get the chance to speak tonight and you'd like to, you can always reach out to us, send us an email to ncoffeemore@northamptonma.gov. That'll get to the rest of the commission. You can always make those. You don't have to wait until after a meeting as well. So I'm going to time you. If you get to the end of the 3 minutes, I will ask that you finish your last sentence, and then we'll move on. All right. So if you would like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand feature on the participants window, on the participants pane. So if you are, sorry, on the reactions pane now. So in your Zoom interface, select reactions and then select raise hand. If you don't see that, you can always send a message to myself or Noah so that we can recognize you when it's your turn. All right, so we're going to start in the order in which the hands were raised. So starting with Rob Eastman.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Robert Eastman. I live in Ward 3 in Northampton. And tonight I wanted to talk about what I heard in the alternative subcommittee meeting last week. There was a pretty intense conversation that happened among the committee that left me with a lot to think about as a white person in my participation in this commission's work. But what I wanted to say is, you know, the group talked about the power dynamics within the group. And I guess in my biggest hopes, I thought that this commission would be having more conversations like that from the beginning. You know, I think there's a reason why, and we all know why, the commission set aside seats for people who have been directly harmed by police. And, you know, it just really disheartening when I hear people like Javier and Dan and Josie, who are people of color on this commission, who have spoken to harm police have done to them as individuals in the ways that, you know, those of us who haven't had those experiences or are white or have white privilege will never be able to understand. And so I just wanted to say that I hope, you know, as we go forward, that we're all thinking about this, that we have more conversations like this. I wanted to thank Booker and acknowledge that Booker facilitated that conversation in a very, in a great way. It was a very vulnerable conversation to have. And, you know, I'm not surprised that that work came down to Black man on this commission. Too often, Black people and people of color have to do that work. And so I just want to call on some of the other commissioners, particularly the white ones, to look to Booker's example and do our part in creating space for those conversations to happen going forward. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So the next person is maybe John Martin.
Yes, that's right. Hi, everyone. Good evening. So I use an eval for my first name. Most folks go with John or Jan. I use they, them pronouns, and I live here in Ward 2 in Northampton. First of all, I want to thank all of you for the incredible amount of time and energy you're putting into this work and volunteering for our community and our city. I've heard some from folks in my community, from folks I'm tied to, talk about how the members of the commission have been looking into the issue of better trainings for police. And I wanted to share an excerpt from an article written in June called "Implicit Bias Trainings Don't Actually Change Police Behavior," that I hope will illustrate a point that many members of the commission and the public have been trying to make. I just want to do a quick content warning. The story does include depiction of police violence. Last week, Derek Sunderland, this is a quote from the article, was one of hundreds of protesters outside the city hall in San Jose, California. The 27-year-old community organizer and charity worker who is Black held a sign that read, "We are worthy of life." As he stood in the crowd, Sunderland saw police shooting protesters with rubber bullets. He walked over to the line of officers and pleaded with them to stop. In the footage of the incident, local news outlet ABC7 captured Sunderland stands around roughly 20 feet away from police. He makes no sudden movements and doesn't reach for anything in his pockets without warning. The police started shooting, hitting Sunderland in the groin. He had emergency surgery, but is not sure if he is able to have children. On its face, Sunderland's story is not remarkable. He's one of dozens of protesters police have harmed in demonstrations against police violence and systematic racism spread across the country in the last 2 weeks. In the context of this article, this twist in Sunderland's profession, he is an implicit bias trainer who has been working with the San Jose Police Department for 3 years. The way they treated people out there over the weekend has been really heartbreaking, Sunderland told ABC7. San Jose Police Chief Eddie Garcia, who Sunderland knows personally, issued a statement saying, "Derek has been a real leader in our community's efforts to reduce bias and discrimination through dialogue." The officer who shot Sunderland was transferred to desk duty, but still the incident underscores the important question. If police departments can spend 3 years undergoing bias training and still shoot a peaceful unarmed Black protester, what has the training really achieved? Recent studies on implicit bias trainings also show that they are not effective. And I can say this even for my own profession. I work in DE&I work in higher education local here in the Valley. There's a ton of research that's coming out recently that a minimum of like 9 hours of continued engagement gets a small modicum of behavior change, right? So unless there's it can't necessarily fit the kind of behavior change and relearning and unlearning that it takes to really change the way people approach and think about identity, about power, about race, right? It takes a lot of time and investment that doesn't translate to a work day, right? It takes a lifetime of dedication. It takes 24/7 dedication. Anyway, I just would like to encourage folks to focus on the report on diverting from policing, divesting from policing and investing into community-led alternatives, given all of this fact. Thank you again for all of your work and what you're doing, and big thanks to the commissioners who have been advocating for bold changes and for the prioritizing the voices of people who are directly impacted by policing.
All right, so that was your time. Thank you very much. So the next person on the list is Danielle Omadeo.
Hi there, thank you. My name is Danielle Amadeo. I live in Ward 3. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also the Northampton Arts Council chair, so I'm gonna actually hop off this meeting early to go to that meeting. I'm sorry I won't be able to stay. I wanna thank you all for your time and energy and volunteering on this commission. I know I've emailed you in the past, and I've also emailed the mayor about this, but I do believe that your work is essential and that you should be paid. So I'm happy to say it on a recording that we should not require our citizens to be volunteering for this work that we'd be paying consultants like a ton of money to do, right? So I think we should be paying you. And happy to advocate that wherever it needs to be heard outside of this Zoom room as well. I'd really like to echo Jan's point and what others have said regarding training for police. I know training sounds good. I think we're socialized to believe that training can make us really good at our jobs, right? Like, I need to learn how to use a spreadsheet for my work. I'm going to take a training on Excel or on Google Sheets, and I'm going to learn how to use the spreadsheet, and it's going to work. This is different. And as many of the commissioners and advocates have already shared, reforms like trainings and civilian oversight boards have been tried for over 100 years to little effect. They do not work. So why are we going to try something that's been done a million times? I'd also like to share an anecdote that maybe will speak specifically to why training won't be effective if historical precedent is not enough, but an anecdote as to why training might not be effective here in Northampton. I experienced a hate crime in Northampton and filed a police report. It wasn't met to my satisfaction. I don't think it was handled very well. So I followed up with Counselor Nash from my ward, and he encouraged me to get in touch with Chief Casper to discuss that specific case and then also my general concerns about police reform. So I had that conversation with her in the fall, many months ago. But I was kind of curious. I was like, how are you doing? How is your team doing? How are you responding to all these calls to defund? Like, what are your thoughts? And she noted how personally her team was taking this. And it's personal, right? Like, you're talking about cutting funds that maybe are going to cut people's jobs. But she especially noted that they were taking personal responses. They were taking it personally when people were protesting police brutality. And she noted that there was an intense defensiveness that she encountered when, as their supervisor, she went to them to try to have conversations about police brutality and race. She said, I'm reading some notes here, that they, quote, wanted no part of that, and frankly were pretty pissed when she added books to the leadership library, which is where they add books on like how to become a captain or how to move through the ranks of the police force, so that her team were not happy with her when she added books to that leadership library on anti-racism and alternative police reform. And she noted that they were not in a learning mode. So I'm really concerned that if her team is not in a learning mode when their literal chief, their boss, tries to do trainings and lead conversations about this, that they're going to be in a learning mode when the city council or the mayor or someone else asks them to engage in trainings.
Thank you.
So, okay, thank you.
That was your time. Thank you very much. The next person on the list is Sophie Mackey.
Hi, my name is Sophie Mackey, and I'm a resident of Northampton. I want to also mention my support for the work that everyone on the commission is doing and the time that you're putting into this, particularly those who are advocating for positions critical to the need for police, as well as those who are supporting ideas that really go beyond policing and offer the kind of care and safety outside of policing that our community really needs. I know that there can be pushback from powerful people for those positions. I want to also continue my support for focusing on solutions that really go beyond reforms and go beyond trainings. Something that a community member mentioned to me that I think is a really powerful point is that for people who have been most negatively impacted by police and are most marginalized, those are people who understand more than anyone that these reforms are not going to work and that these reforms are not going to offer the safety that people need. So I think looking to reduce funding from the police and figure out where that funding can go fully outside of the police department, whether that's going to things like housing and community mental health supports and mutual aid, all of those things, rather than more police training or more police programs or more specific departments within those police. All of those would be reforms that really aren't going to meet community needs. And I would be so excited to see what money and this funding can go to beyond that. And so I really hope that those ideas will be given consideration and fully fleshed out by the commission. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So the next is Rye Buckley.
Hello. As always, thank you so much for all your work. I will try and be quick today. I'm going to read several quotes from the last full commission meeting. They're not perfect direct quotes. They're things that I tried to scribble down as fast as I could as I was hearing them. So I apologize if I misrepresent anyone, but I think they're going to be pretty good. This first quote is from Josie. Josie said, "We talk about reform versus abolition. Quite respectfully, reform has had 100 years. We have empirical evidence to show that it's not working. As we have evidence from the NPD that shows that we should not put more money into the hands of the police department. Once these communities' material conditions are met, we don't need policing. That's what abolition looks like. It's not hatred towards the police. We want our communities to be stronger. We want our communities to be funded in the way they need to be funded. We want those who have been oppressed from white supremacist structure, and to do what we must, and to do that, we must divest from policing and invest in the community." Also, in this meeting, Javier said, to diminish a little bit the footprint, it doesn't address the bigger problem. It has been happening for more than 100 years. I have to say this so many times, and I'll keep saying it. I understand that the members of the commission, you don't feel the urgency because you don't live this. And I want you to stop and think about that. You do not feel the urgency and the importance of changes of this pervasive system because you don't live under the system of oppression that other people live in. And I really want you to think about that. And then, whoops, I'm trying to find my other one. I can't find the other one. The other quote that I really wanted to read was also from Javier. Javier discussed the idea of reallocating money and really eloquently compared it to school departments. Talked about how if you're transferring the service from one department to another, you also transfer the money from one department to the other. It's how our government works. I found these were just really well said. I'm sorry I stumbled over them. But I hope you will all consider those words from your fellow commissioners as we start today's meeting. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And then the last person with their hand up so far, and they'll be our last speaker based on time, is Ashwin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashwin Ravi Kumar. I use he, him pronouns, and I am an Amherst resident who comes to Northampton a lot. I've been following this Policing Review Commission with great interest. I also sit on the Town of Amherst's Energy and Climate Action Committee, and I want to share a couple things. So first is I'm really excited about what this commission has been doing, and I managed to get caught up on all sort of the details of what the subcommittees have been doing, in part by reading a piece in the Shoestring, an op-ed that was put out by the group Northampton Abolition Now, about their experiences with this commission. And there was a lot of really good things that they had to say about what's been happening here. And in particular, they really uplifted what commissioners like Javier and Booker and Josie and Dan have been advocating for, and their willingness to be really bold in what they're calling for. And in particular, in the Alternatives Subcommittee, I heard that there was a really deep and reflective conversation about how commissioners are bringing lots of different positional experiences to the work of this commission. And I understand that Booker in particular went to some really tremendous lengths to lead that conversation that really needed to happen. So I just wanted to thank Booker in particular for facilitating that space, in addition to just moving this along in such an important and bold direction. One thing that I just wanted to quickly speak to from, I think it was the last full commission meeting that I attended, is there was a couple of comments to the effect of we need to invest in community-led safety. We want to explore and continue to support peer-led approaches to crisis, to support people who use drugs, sex workers, unhoused people, people experiencing various types of crises. But we probably don't want to first start by defunding or divesting from policing and from the police department to do that. And I just want to mention a couple things that I've heard from around the country. So in Austin, Texas, they were able to buy up hotel space for unhoused people by specifically cutting the police department budget. And it just wouldn't have been possible to do that without making those cuts. And in Seattle, they diverted a portion of the 18% cut that they made to the budget to climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts. And just across the river in Amherst, we're hearing from a lot of organizers the common refrain. Amherst has 36 cops and 1 sustainability commissioner. And over 50 years ago, Martin Luther King said that a budget is not a simple allocation of resources. A city budget is actually a moral document that reflects the community's priorities and tells you who is centered in the voice of the community and the decision process of the community. So in that context, I think in Northampton too, it's going to be really important to ask ourselves, is having dozens of cops and 1 or a handful of people working on sustainability, 1 or a handful of people working on true, genuine community safety, really the reflection of the values of a town that is ostensibly committed to racial justice and climate justice and other forms of social justice? And to me, the answer to that is not really. So I just really hope that divesting from policing it remains central to all the wonderful kind of positive proposals that are emerging from this commission's really diligent work. So thank you so much, and I hope that you have a great rest of your meeting. Cheers.
Yep, thank you very much. We have hit the 15 minutes for public comment. I do see one more person, Yao Ping. If you'd like to email the commission your comments, please let us know, and we'll reach out and reach back if there's anything that we can also comment back on. Moving us along onto the next topic. It's just about inviting speakers. Just given that we are at the sort of tail end of this, one of the groups, and they're represented here at this moment, is the Northampton Abolition Now group. They have a list of demands they've been sort of formulating since before this commission was started. But now that they have a formalized set of demands and they've sent them to us along with a lot of other research, I was thinking that it might be useful to have them speak to the full commission to do a very short, like a 10-minute, presentation of their demands, and then a, like at most 10-minute question and answer for us. But also wanted to open that up to other folks or other groups that people might want to hear speak, so that we can have a similar style of very short presentations while we're meeting, just because we are hitting the end. Do folks have any reaction to that? Javier?
Thanks, Dan. So by reaction, you mean sort of positive, negative, or whatever comes to mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having in mind the amount of the people that have been come to us to talk about specifically the work that they do at their own organizations' work, in the times that I had pointed out sort of some level of lack of commonality knowledge or a common language in the commission, I think would be useful to have them. I mean, our alternatives is having tomorrow Chief Casper coming to talk to us and answer a set of questions. So I don't see any problem with having sort of community-based organization or group from Northampton who is working on this. And also because, you know, we have been overflooded with a lot of extremely good material, and most of that really good material has been sent from them. So, you know, I have a lot of questions in relation to the material they have sent. That material has led me to find other material that are extremely good. So I would like sort of to go a little deeper into that.
Anyone else? Alex?
I've been interested in the work of Hampshire Hope, and which is a project connected to the Northampton Health Department. And I just saw an interesting position that really spoke a lot about harm reduction philosophy. And so I'd be interested in having someone from there come and just explain what their process is at present.
Okay. Do you have a contact person? Or yeah, we can follow this up afterwards. If you send a contact person that I can reach out to, if you want to reach out to them.
Yeah, I'll email you with the information I have, and we can figure that out.
Right. Perfect. Are there any other groups? Namdi?
Yeah, so I too am mindful about the limited time we have. There's a particular group that I've been in contact with that I think, whose voice I think is relevant to our work and our decision, and that's my employer, Smith College, that has a relationship, has its own policing department, but also a relationship with the city of Northampton's police, and in a sense depends on Northampton police. And so in our conversations, we talked about whether it was worth having somebody from the college, their police department, address us with those needs. But I'm mindful about our limited time. And so what I had sort of said was I asked them to prepare some kind of written statement outlining their wishes or needs that I would then share with the rest of the commission, and that could possibly be included in our final report. Again, I just did that with that, but I'm presenting this to all of you in case there is a feeling among people in the group that you would rather hear from somebody in person in our commission meetings. If someone else thinks I was wrong to suggest we don't have the time for that. I mean, I do think their voices really should be included. And so with that in mind, that general model of inviting statements from interested parties, written statements for people who we couldn't include because we don't have time. If there are people like that, we might consider that as a second alternative. So I've got nothing against the idea of bringing the abolitionist group that we described to speak for 10 minutes. But I think if we generate a longer list, maybe we should, or if the people we want to reach out to, particular voices, particular outside agencies who you want to have consult, just write a statement for us to kind of consider for our final report. That would be another way to kind of get testimony, seek testimony from bodies who have not presented themselves to us. It's just a suggestion. But I guess what I want to do is just put out there, if there's others who feel like they want to hear from Smith College, let me know that, and I certainly could facilitate that.
All right, thank you. Booker? Oh, hang on,
I agree with inviting the Abolish group to come speak with us. More importantly is what Javier said. I like the chance to sort of ask some questions because they have sent us already a lot of material. So both having 10 minutes of presentation time along with some amount of time for back and forth.
All right, excellent. So are there any other thoughts? Oh, Javier?
Two things. So Nelquit is coming to talk to the alternatives February 17 at 8. So that's sort of me and Booker invite everybody here to attend that meeting. Their two co-directors are coming to talk to us. In relationship to what Nandi said about, I welcome a statement from the Smith or somebody from the Smith coming to talk to us. I don't necessarily fully agree with having their specific statements added to the commission's final report, because I feel that that would justify that we would have to do that with everybody who wanted to do it. You know, any organization, CSO, or anybody, right? So I appreciate if they can come here or they can send us sort of an email about their position, their thoughts. And I do remember beautifully how during the last 2 years, most of the buildings in the Smith display Black Lives Matter signs, gigantic ones. So I do appreciate, certainly I do appreciate how Smith has sort of, and their students, and I really love for them to come here to talk to us.
So, so we can extend the invitations to the Northampton Abolition, the Hampshire Hope, and NAMD organizing that Smith representative to speak. Again, follow the same format so that each of these is going to be 10 minutes of presenting a statement or less, and then 10 minutes of question and answer. Awesome. So unless there's anything else, we'll move on to the next item. All right. So this one, I'm hopefully going to keep it nice and short. So we have this week, our Thursday is our our public hearing, our second public hearing on Thursday. Just the flow and the format, taking into consideration some of the concerns that folks had, we'll be still running the meeting. We're going to reduce the time to 7 minutes instead of 10 for speakers, and we will follow again the idea that not everyone will want a response from the commission or to have a conversation. They might be there to just present or to give their story. So we'll allow for that. If they do want a response, that response is included in that 7 minutes. We'll also have every hour, we will have a 5-minute break so that people have a chance to get up, use the restroom, stretch, get a drink, do something. So we're building in that sort of break time, so it's not a marathon for that. We should have the Spanish translation services available again through UMass. So they should be available and ready to go. We'll also have the live transcription available too. Any discussion on that, Booker? Booker, you're muted.
I want to propose that no one speak for more than 5 minutes.
Okay. So I think what we were going for is still giving people more time more time than the public comment of the 3 minutes, but balancing that time if they wanted to have responses back, but also still limiting or curtailing some of that as well. So are you thinking 5 minutes total, or 5 minutes for a person and then some time for the commission to respond?
So was your 7-minute proposal that would, if there was a response, it had to finish within the 7 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. So if a person speaks for 6 minutes and asks for a response, the response is 1 minute?
Yep.
Okay.
Michael?
I just was trying to remember, is that what was it last time? It was 5 minutes to speak and then 10 if they wanted a response. So is that what you're thinking this time? It would be 5 if they're not looking for a response and 7 if they want some dialogue together?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with that.
And that's in recognition of the fact that most people didn't use all of the time that was allotted. So maybe we can bring that down and sort of curtail some of the things and get more people in if they did suddenly use maximum time. Any other thoughts, concerns, discussion for that? Okay. So then we're moving on, and I'm going to give this over to Cynthia.
Thank you, Dan. The next item on our agenda, we hope you had a chance to read a titled Possible Broad Points of Agreement or Consensus document. And if you haven't, Dan, I think you'll share it, or did people receive it, had a chance to look at it? Great. Just a little background, Dan, I don't know if you noticed, this is really happening in real time. We got a response from the city solicitor. Our plan was to distribute this document and have all the commissioners, very simple, do a green light, red light, yellow light. Green, yep, this looks good. Not wordsmithing at this point. Red, no, no way. Yellow, well, maybe. But we asked the city solicitor if that can be done. But apparently the way I'm reading it, Dan, again, this is coming through in real time, it cannot be done. It would be a violation of open meeting law if those responses came to us directly. So that's fine. I think we can work around it, but and we can talk about how to develop it beyond tonight. But tonight, what we would like to do is have you comment on any one or all of the points, particularly from the perspective of what do you think might be a problem for you personally, depending on values or ideology about any of the points that are listed here. And again, this is a draft. This is just a draft. So just want to open the discussion up. I hope I can see everybody, and you could just raise your hands for those who want to speak. That would be great. And I'm sorry, I can only, because of the share screen, I'm only seeing Nick right now. I don't want to exclude anyone. Oh, thank you, Booker. You're up there too. Yeah, so, okay. Nick first, Booker, I'm sorry. I don't know if you got in there first, but if that's okay. Thank you, Nick. Nick, any comments?
Well, it's a clarification here. Your audio wasn't totally clear for me.
I'm sorry.
What I wasn't clear was how the open meeting law conflicts with the red, yellow, green concept that you were proposing.
Well, the plan was for you to individually rate red, yellow, green, send it back to us. And that would be a violation. Dan, are you reading it the same way as we just got it when the meeting opened?
But we could do that within the meeting. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Always, that's always acceptable and preferable.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Just to comment on that, probably that was considered a possible deliberation over email, and that's the reason why.
Yeah, and I mean, possibly, right? Booker?
So, by the way, thank you for doing this document. If this was given to us at the Unitarian Universalist Church, we would have an exercise where we would put everybody in the room and read this statement and then say there's a graph on the floor and stand where you are on the graph, which is both, it sort of shows variety of opinion, and so that everybody can sort of see that everybody doesn't agree and sort of how far and where do they stand. Unfortunately, and I guess if we were all getting to meet in the city council chambers, that's what we would get to do, but we can't do that here. This is a little late to say it, but I think there is a way to do polls on Zoom, because that's actually also what we do to try to figure out what people want. Does that also miss on, because otherwise I think it's going to be hard. I'm perfectly comfortable with saying, here's where I am on this statement and just bang.
Yep.
And if that's what you'd like to do, let's just do that. But at another point, I'm wondering if using polling within Zoom would be another way to do this.
I think that's a great suggestion. And I think, as you know, we want to be careful. So we'll run everything by the city solicitor and just try for tonight to see where people are at different aspects. So we're doing it in an open environment. But yeah, that's, if we could do a poll, that would be a lot easier, but we'll start with the discussion tonight if that's okay with everyone. Great suggestion, thank you. I'm seeing David, I believe. Yes, David?
Yeah, are we looking, are you looking now for responses to the?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'll just, without belaboring this too much, I'll just say that there's a lot in here I like, and that I think is exactly what we should be doing. For example, just numbers 5, 6, and 7, and I don't mean that to exclude any of the others, but those are the kind of simple statements that I think we can build consensus around. What I don't like is number 1. And the reason I don't like number 1 is not because I necessarily disagree with the substance of it, but because it is unnecessarily dogmatic. It is unnecessarily infused with a leftist view of the world that probably most of us share, but which I think is really unhelpful in selling this to a broader public. And, you know, I expressed at earlier meetings that my deepest fear here is that this group is going to be written off as a bunch of lefty activists and say, oh, they're at it again, and that we're going to be ignored. And I think this fuels that kind of thinking. I think that we have an opportunity to accomplish real things with this commission to dramatically reduce the role of the police in this community. And I think that broad dogmatic statements that remind me of my college sociology classes really are not helpful. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, David. Namdi?
Yeah, I really want to emphatically second David's comments. Couldn't have said it better. I think that the first statement is wildly overreaching. And I say this as somebody who teaches on race and racism, has taught it to social workers at Smith and the School for Social Work, writes on it, and, you know, and by the way, probably believes this, believes that much of what's in here is probably accurate, but is not helpful, is unlikely to help us, will derail this process. And I would not support such language and deeply resist it. Couldn't be clearer about that. But I also want to add that much of the rest of the document I do agree with, and that, you know, I think there's a lot of consensus, and I could support a lot of the rest of it.
Let's go with Josie, then Javier. Josie?
Yeah, sure thing. I would like to disagree with both David and Namdi on that first point. I think that, you know, I think seeing that first point as being overly dogmatic is extremely reductive to the very real conversations we're trying to have here about systemic racism and its presentness here in Northampton, as well as the continual transformation of policing in general, including in Northampton, toward militarization and the constant propagation of the incarceral state. Simply putting it out there, I don't think you know, throws us all out as kind of loony leftists so much as it is an observation of reality through empirical data, and trying to appease an audience that is situated in white supremacy and propagating the status quo and being quote unquote civil is overly not helpful when there's real work that is trying to be done, and trying to like worry about the messaging is beside the point, in my opinion.
Thank you, Josie. Javier and then Dan.
Dan had to go first. He was trying to raise his hand.
Was he? Oh, I'm sorry. I
right.
was going to apologize to you, Javier, because I thought I gave you the short shrift. Okay, Dan, Javier.
I mean, I'm excited because I just found out that co-hosts can raise their hand, which is exciting. Anyway, I think one of the things, I mean, to say, and I guess again, this is just the spirit of these statements, not the exact wording, but even the chief of police last night recognized that the police department reflects the racism that exists in that community. Northampton is not immune to racism. I don't think that it's a radical thing to say that the police department is racist, and it's like all of society is structured by that. The police chief admitted this, that it's there. I don't think it's weird for us or out of place for us or too lefty or too sociology class to admit something that even the chief can admit. I feel pretty strongly in that if we don't acknowledge that, if we don't give space to it, even if it's just in conversation with ourselves, where are we setting the bar for where our conversation goes and our interactions go? I feel pretty strongly that it's okay to make that statement, that we're safe to make that statement, that we're justified in it. But I'm also wondering what language, I mean, this is part of this conversation. What language would make sense to acknowledge that the police department is not immune from systemic racism, that it's not immune to the influences of military, or militaristic attitudes and institutional policies? What language would be okay to include and acknowledge as a point of moving forward? Because I think that's important, right? So I want to push us to say what we would like to see as well.
Thank you, Dan. And before Javier, a link to the document is in the chat, just to let our visitors know that. Javier?
Thanks, Cynthia. I'm going to lower my hand first. Two things. The first one is with 5, 6, and 7 that David mentioned, I think that's sort of substantive to what we really want to do. And after that, you have the 8, 9, and 10 that start talking about how to do it. I really, really appreciate the way how you, Cynthia, and Dan lay out this document, because I think it's extremely useful. And I remember I sent an email to you too as chairs, thanking you for the work that you did with it, because this is really, really good and a really necessary document to start talking about this, right? In relation to number 1, I understand how inflammatory can feel number 1. I do get that. I understand that. But if I would like to be corrected if what I'm gonna state now it's wrong. We do agree here that we live in a white supremacist system. Is that correct? We do agree that we live in a system that is racist. We do agree that when we're working when people are doing oversight in police budget, one of the first things that people does is to analyze the military surplus that police departments are getting. As far as I know, I do it when I do police record requests of police departments. So that's we're talking about the militarization and the criminalization of and the targeting of affected communities. It's something that I have lived, so I don't have to ask anybody for that. So I think that, and again, I would love for somebody to tell me, no, I don't think we're in for somebody to tell me, I don't think we're in a white supremacist system. I don't think we're in a racist system. I would like that if somebody in the commission thinks like that, I would love to hear that. So I do feel that we maybe can sort of rewrite number 1 is still, because at the end of the day, I am Dan and Cynthia, if you can correct me on this one, but I do feel that it's sort of it's a contextualization. This is not happening in a vacuum. And this is the reasons why this is happening. And this is the reason why we are offering these points that are going to come later on. That's how I feel that.
Thank you, Javier. Namdi, Michael, then Nick.
So for me, having been clear about my opposition to the one as currently written, I want to say that to me, my ear hears Dan's rephrasing of number one entirely differently to my opposition to number one. So I too was in a meeting with the chief of police and was co-leading that meeting. And I too heard the chief of police admit that police officers are people and are, have the same racial biases as anybody else in the community. And so I think she would agree with a statement like police officers as members of the community, have the same biases that all of us have. Something along those lines would be a much, much more reasonable and in line way to approach this. But even if you were to put it that way, I question it being number one, which I think is, again, provocative, likely to derail serious consideration of the other points below. Race is super important here. I'm a Black man myself. I've been over-policed myself. As I say, this is an area of central concern to me professionally and personally. But I've sat here through these meetings, and it's been striking to me how little of the complaints about the police department have been about race. I mean, race has certainly been a component, but I've heard just as much complaints about houseless people. I've heard just as much about the mentally ill. So I think it's on the one hand, we're brought together because of the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and race obviously occupies a place in our conversation. But there's something about throwing race and racism and white supremacy in the faces of the readers of this document that I think does us no good and does harm to the I think the much more broad and ambitious aims, which is to really speak to the ways that the current police department affects lots of marginalized populations. And I think an effort that turns down the temperature on the white supremacy talk, though it is a reality, lots of things are realities that don't appear in this document. We can take on all sorts of injustices, negative realities of the world, but to put that one up there at number one in this form, I think undermines the credibility. And I would rather see a much more even-handed way. And to me, there's the world apart from saying what this says and saying the police are as racist as any, by the way, not just as any one of us on this commission, which would be a much more honest beginning, that there's a human problem we have with racism. And I think if we engage in it at that level, we begin to start to have a constructive community process as opposed to us versus them. So that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you, Namdi. Michael, then Nick.
Thank you. I had, when I opened this document this morning, had a very similar feeling to what David and Namdi have both kind of relayed here. And I realized that
So Michael, if you can hear us, I think you froze. Give you a second or two. See if it's Comcast, Cat, something. You back, Michael?
Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we lost you a little bit. So
thank you. Thanks for your
no
patience.
worries.
So I'll just start over that. I had a very similar feeling when I read this document this morning that David and Namdi both relayed at the beginning here, but also realized that I'm supposed to feel uncomfortable. This is what some of our public commenters were talking about. We're here to have these difficult conversations. So we have to be able to take this on and read this and feel uncomfortable. That said, I also think that what Namdi just said about, and what Dan said, kind of not, I hesitate to use the word softening the language because I don't think it needs to be soft. I think we need to have a difficult conversation here. But I do think that items basically 2 through 15 all strike me as constructive, whereas 1 strikes me as more inflammatory, as mentioned. So I don't know if there's a way to say that message without being quite so inflammatory, but at the same time, I'm a little conflicted because, like I said, I felt that this is part of the difficult conversation this commission is lined up to have.
Thank you, Michael. Nick, then Alex, and Namdi, is your hand still up? I just want to make sure. Okay, fair enough. Nick, then Alex. Oh, Dan. Dan's in there too.
I understand the importance of addressing realities, trying to be as direct as possible. I also agree that discomfort may be a part of this for many people. But I do feel, I want to say, I think that this would be read by many people as a personal attack on the Northampton Police Department. That's the way it would be perceived. And I feel that it could be said in a different way. It could be said something like, policing in our country reflects the systemic racism, blah, blah, blah. And it could say, the Northampton Police Department is not immune to this. But to say the Northampton Police Department makes it sound like, well, other police departments aren't necessarily like this, but the Northampton Police Department is. And I think that's the way it would be read. I also have an issue on number 11, but we can get to that later.
Okay, and hopefully we can. And I do want to make the distinction that this isn't necessarily how the final report is going to be read, not necessarily. This is about points of agreement. Do we agree that the Northampton Police Department reflects blah, 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 what is in number 1? So sorry to interject myself. Alex, then Dan, then Javier.
Thank you all. Yeah, I was reflecting on this about how, our whole society is permeated with this culture. The Northampton Police Department is one expression of that as the local enforcers of the unjust system. And so I appreciate framing it in terms of policing in general, and of course, recognizing the inclusiveness in that. So yeah, just and remembering that that it isn't just though the individuals, like all of us have, and it isn't just the individuals in the police department that have racist tendencies, but it's the structure of policing. So that, again, recognizing that, sort of showing a bit of the history, I think if well phrased in the report is something that we should include.
Dan, Javier?
Yeah, I'll make this quick because I think you had already started to say that, like, this isn't going to be like thrown out into the world as this is our final report, is these 15 statements. This was just giving us a sort of a way to understand where we all are. It's been brought up a number of times, sort of like, if we don't have a set of values that we've all agreed on to move forward, this is getting us there, and it's a little bit getting us towards where we also want to have our discussion for our recommendations, sort of two birds with one stone, but also that complicates it. And so just, as long as we understand that, I think, for me anyway, it's mostly that there's the spirit of this, which is that there is systemic racism. It's an institutional problem. It's endemic to a whole bunch of different places, but we're looking at how it's manifesting in this location, in this city, in this department. And that's what brought us here. The other part, and I agree with Namdi completely, is that we haven't talked a lot about race. Like, people haven't been coming and speaking about race. I wouldn't necessarily I wouldn't want that to imply that it means that we don't have a problem, or that the Northampton Police Department doesn't have a problem with race. I think a lot of this has to do with how things were handled in the past, how people felt heard or not heard, or what they felt might be, like what would open them up to retribution, or fears like that. And also, like, how do you even report it? How do you complain about it? And that those structures influence what we've heard on the commission, what we heard through city council meetings before that. So I think it's something that we should probably think about, and maybe even find ways to bring into the final report that we haven't at this point, right? Like, figuring out how to fix racism is hard. If it was easy, it'd be done. And so I think keeping that in the forefront, I think that might be one of the reasons why this was first, but it's also sort of a foundational statement of why are we here? Well, this, or some permutation of this sentence. So I think that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Dan. Javier?
Thanks, Cynthia. I'm gonna lower my hand. Two things. The first one, yeah, I mean, I hear what Nick is saying. It's sort of I put it together with what Alex is saying, right? I think that we can build the context that is needed to build in a, you know, if you want to say it in a less direct way, but at the same time, you know, we know that the Northampton Police Department is embedded in a white supremacist system. We know that it's general, it's all across. It's not, you know, it's not out of it. But if people would feel more comfortable using a language that is more general, I mean, that's fine. The other thing is, you know, I do a lot of work across Western Mass because of my, you know, my work, my real work, and the way how many localities across the Commonwealth have deal with their own police department, it's complicated, right? And one of the things that we're seeing across the board in Western Mass is that white liberal exceptionalism tendency. Not my police department. My police department is the most progressive of all of them. And I have heard this about 5 or 6 police departments, if no more, in Massachusetts. And that's complicated, right? Because that means that people don't understand that we're talking about a systemic issue. And that's when we're talking about, you know, white supremacism. And one of the things that I'm thinking about when I'm listening all what is being said is that I do understand when Nandi clarified, I was not there, so I don't really know, but that what probably the chief of police said, that police officers are just people. Yeah, but they are people with guns. I'm people, if I, you know. So there is something, there is several, if not a lot of added layers to that, right? So it's be saying that they are just people doesn't, at least for me, being honest with, doesn't make the cut, because we live in a country where a person of color has to be able to handle high stress level situations in front of a police officer, and police officers are unable to control themselves. But the person of color has to. That person of color is a person, doesn't have any training at all. But the police officer does. So I think that when we're talking about, well, you know, police officers are just people, I agree with that. I mean, hopefully everybody, yes, they are people. It's a pretty baseline. But when we're talking about expectations for people who have a specific role into this system, we cannot go to that level. We have to go up. That's one thing. And I think I can wait to talk about the rest, but thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Alex, I'm not sure. Did you want to go again? Your hand was up before.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was up from before. Yeah.
Okay. I'm thinking that just in the interest of time, so and we have somebody said they like 2 through 15, so we can agree on all those, I guess. But no, this is an important one that I think we can spend some time rewording, but it would be great to see if we could get consensus on the fact that there is systemic racism and militarization and criminalization in society and in police departments. That might be a way for us to think about this, and but language is going to be important. So I think maybe in the interest of time, because we have another large topic, Dan and I will see how we can do this poll of everyone, and also at the same time look at the language to see if we can frame it in a way that it's a value versus how we're going to feed it back to City Council, keeping in mind that we want to sort of make the case for our recommendations as well in the final report. And this would be part of making that case that something that is happening in society is being reflected in all our institutions. So I don't want to draw a line to the conversation, but I want to be cognizant of the time. Any final comments on the approach, the consensus of trying to find out what our values are? And if there's anything else that sticks out that people want to react to, and maybe we could just spend 5 minutes on that and then we'll move to the next topic. By no means is this the end of this discussion. It's meant to be a beginning. And so, Nick, oh, you took your hand down. So Namdi. Oh, and now your hand is back up, but I'll call on Namdi.
So I just want to, I guess, back up Nick's comment from earlier. As you and Dan try to revise that first statement, it occurs to me that something that is a little bit more fact-based that almost nobody could disagree with, like what's been happening in policing in the country. I don't think we need to appeal to the underlying white supremacy. And why I'm suggesting this is that I want this to be a document that leads to change. And what I would love to do is sort of almost bring the Northampton police on board as agreeing with everything that we're saying. And one way to do that is to sort of say that we can't deny that there's been a problem with policing in this country. I absolutely agree with Javier that yes, these may be people, but these are people with guns. And I think the Northampton police cannot deny that if they are people, and if they are people who have biases like everyone else, and they're people with guns, and they won't deny that people in the community have some suspicion about them, then it becomes, well, what can they do about that? And yesterday when the police chief met us, I mean, she didn't have a lot of ideas. I mean, she was reform minded, but also threw her hands up in the air about, I don't know what can be done. I mean, we're doing our best. I'm trying to learn. But I think if we position this as we all agree there's a problem here, you agree as the police department, we see it, the community sees it. It's better than framing it as, you are infected with racism, you're a white supremacist organization. And I just think that sets up an unnecessary, there's going to be opposition no matter what to what we propose. But I think as much as we can kind of claim the common ground with what the police would already admit to anyway, it puts us in a better position to then move forward with why things have to change. So I guess I just want to leave it there. I think some framing that speaks to the national policing problem and that also hints that Northampton is probably not exempt from some of it. They're exempt. I mean, we haven't had any killings of Black men in the streets of Northampton, but we can speak to the fact that they are police. They're people with guns. These things could happen here. That kind of language, I think, positions us makes everyone come on board to what to do to prevent this, as opposed to, demonizing this group that would see themselves as, a progressive police department. I mean, if we can find fault with them, we should talk about the fault, but I think we shouldn't paint everybody with a broad brush. It wouldn't be very just. And so that's just my suggestion, and it backs up what Nick said earlier, and I'll yield to Nick now. Thank you.
Thank you, Namdi. Nick, and then we'll move on to our next, but there's Alex. Nick.
I'd just like to clarify, it seems my hand goes down when I unmute myself. So that's part of the process here. I wanted to just ask, when you said it's a way of polling, are we talking about, are you talking about anonymous polling, or just where does each of us stand?
Yeah, where does each of us stand, I think is the direction.
Okay, and there seems to be, just so you know, I'm seeing a yes, no thing at the bottom of, I'll let you guys figure out the details of that. I just want to say number 11, I would break it out into 4 different parts. It actually is, I can't agree to, I don't have the same feeling about all the sentences. So just would like you guys to take a look at that and look at how it would be broken down.
Thank you.
There are statements that I totally agree with and statements I only partially agree with. Thanks.
Thank you. And then Alex, and then we'll move on. Alex?
Great. Yeah, so I actually create one of the ways that we can share, because we can share anything in a meeting, is that we can create documents that have our responses and then put them in the chat, and you and Dan can retrieve them. So I actually did that for some of the comments, so I thought I would just share that right now in the chat. everyone can view that. It's not very complete, but and then for future weeks, we can each think about, kind of writing our responses, and then so that's a way to collectively bring back responses.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alex. So we hope that you'll continue to look at the document. We'll continue to work with it. And it'll probably be on agendas in the future. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Dan to talk about the department that seems to be the answer to all our problems. And we've called it many, many things. So I think it's community care, service, safety. So Dan?
Yeah, and so this is, again, we're not going to, hammer out exactly all of the fine details for this, but I think at this point, I've heard it multiple times in each subcommittee, and we've heard it from public comment. We've seen there are different cities that are doing these sort of things. So it seems like it might be a good idea to talk about a new department and what that might look like, why we might want one, and what might be housed within that. I forwarded you, and I apologize, the workday gets in the way of this sort of stuff, so it didn't come out until a little bit later, but a statement from Michael, and I'll ask him to sort of present that to us in terms of the possibility of a new department. So I'm going to hand that off to Michael, and then we can discuss it.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks Dan and Cynthia for reading what I wrote and for sharing it with the group. As we've been discussing a new department, I was thinking about a number of different things, and one thing was that I had attended an event for elected officials, government officials around health equity. It was held by the Western Mass Health Equity Network, and it was race and health equity tools for local governments and organizations. And the biggest thing they advocated for was to create for organizations, and this was for states, this was for private businesses as well, and municipalities, to create publicly funded office that would work towards the goals of equality. And so that was on my mind as we've been discussing this. And then I noted in my what was emailed to you here was that, on August 20th, the Board of Health here in Northampton passed a resolution declaring racism a public health emergency. And you can read in there the details, but needless to say, the Board of Health is committed to working with the city, whether it's city offices, the city council, the mayor's office, to try to create, again, equitable solutions to anything that's going on here in the city. And that includes things like orders and ordinances, and that's being reviewed right now by the council, by a commission similar to this, but the Board of Health is willing to effort that as well. In September, the council passed a resolution in support of actions to combat the public health crisis of systemic racism. And again, it was largely based on the 10-point plan that was released by the Massachusetts State Black and Latino Legislative Caucus. In that time, I really was thinking a lot about the seminar that I had attended, and proposed that not that we change the 10-point plan, but that we make an additional item there that we encourage the city to embrace this idea. So all of that said, basically, I feel that the council, they approved the amendment that I was proposed. I was very honored. That was approved unanimously, and then the resolution itself was passed unanimously. So I felt as we start talking about a new office here, maybe we should be thinking about how we can tie some of the two resolutions together with our work, because it may bring the voice of the council, and I wouldn't speak for the Board of Health, but I do feel that the Board of Health is already on board with this also. As we start talking about a new office, that this is something that can drum up an awful lot of support from two organizations that have already begun to work on it. That said, at the bottom, you see I just jotted down a few ideas. And the thing about this for me was, I realized that as I was doing this, that this group is going to come up with a lot of different ideas to fill in the blanks here. So I just jotted down a few things that came to mind early. what would the mission be? What are the duties? And then what would the staffing be? And I think that's when we start talking about our recommendation. We've discussed it a number of times that the more precise we can be with our recommendations, the better the roadmap's going to be, and the more likely the opportunity will be for these things to be put in place. So I hope everybody had a chance to read it, and I would love to hear your thoughts.
Does anyone have any responses? Awesome. So Javier?
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate, so during the last, 8 meetings, we have been talking about the possibility to the creation of a new department. And I feel that's certainly, it's probably, from my point of view, one of the most concrete steps and recommendations that we can make. With that being said, I think that should be also followed by recommendations about structure, not that obviously that do not conflict with whatever is needed to follow by the charter of the city, but certainly in relationship to, and I have been sort of adamant on this, and every time that we're talking to our service providers or people in the community, accountability. There has to be a feedback loop of accountability. So a department that is actually charged to do and to follow policies to address what we're talking here, I think for optics, but also for transparency, needs to report to people, needs to hold community meetings, needs to be accountable, and people should know where things are standing. And I think that's necessary, for at least for, specifically if we're going to follow a recommendation about the department, that accountability and reporting is also part of a recommendation, specifically with this new department.
Does anyone have any other comments before I throw myself in? Oh, Booker? Oh, hang on, you're still muted there. There we go.
I agree with trying to have a department be made, because I think a lot of the recommendations, certainly that's going to come from the alternatives subcommittee, there's going to need to be something that's in place that sort of steers getting those things in and ongoing and course correcting, finding new problems and things. So I definitely agree with, let's try to have some kind of whatever it will be, or whatever its name will be. And I agree with Javier that the representation will be really important. The power that they're given is very important. How much they get paid is very important. Getting public comment is very important. I guess the question I'm going to ask is, how will we come up? Should this be the whole commission coming up with this description? Or does it belong in a subcommittee? Because I actually think it's hard to fashion something like this with all the people that I see up on the screen. They're all really wonderful people, but it's really hard to get them all in the same place at the same time all the time.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I think one of the things that and I'm going to segue into my own comment because it's really about that, which is that we sort of need to think about what we want what's the purpose of this department? What's the scope of it? What can it handle? And what can it? So, thinking about if this is a department that lives under the Department of Health, or if this is an office under the Department of Health, whatever it is, a lot of the things that we've talked about in terms of like peer responders to mental health crises, to substance use, and those sort of things, that fits naturally in that sort of space. But if we also followed with David's recommendations, or the things that he's bringing up about having traffic responder, having a department that handles traffic, that doesn't necessarily fit, at least for me. I don't know if that would fit under the Department of Health, if traffic enforcement would be there. And so really to start to think about what recommendations we have, if it's not, and again, we haven't made any official recommendations yet, but thinking about the tasks that might fit or have a natural sort of flow in that space, but also what are we concerned about that doesn't fit there too, to sort of maybe find a home for those things as well. I don't know if we have a great way to do that. I think this is going to be something that sort of like a department sort of spans all of our subcommittees. So it might be something that maybe we all flesh out a little bit more and then come together and try and synthesize what we're all thinking about. But I don't have a great plan going forward, at least. We don't even have a consensus model. And I think that's going to be part of what we need in order to start putting that together. But I'm going to end my thing just to get people to think about those sort of things. So the next, sorry, I was looking, so it looks like it's Alex, Nick, David, and then Namdi. So we'll start with Alex.
Great, thanks. I was thinking about accountability, and I responded a little bit into the document to point 9 about, which is community services department needs to be accountable to the people who are most impacted by the work it does and should be overseen and run by those who receive services. And I was thinking that, overseen and run entirely by those who receive services may not be possible, but being accountable to those it serves, to me, maybe seems more of a way to put it. And so I think it's worth looking into kind of the legal structures of various boards that advise departments. For example, we have the Board of Health that is connected to the health department, and the Board of Health has some legal powers that the state gives it, while there are other boards and commissions that are purely advisory to particular departments, like the Energy and Sustainability Commission advises the planning department. And so thinking about, it would be worth looking into seeing how much we can actually kind of build that accountability in, or is it really just sort of kind of a trust of accountability and having a board that could be majority those who have peer experiences and who receive services, and where there is a commitment by the mayor for that board to be accountable to that department, or vice versa, actually. So there's some thoughts about our thinking there.
Yeah, those are all really good. So Nick, then David, then Namdi.
I want to respond to what you said, Booker. Your committee has had, you've had a very tight committee. I've sat in on a couple of meetings. I enjoy the enthusiasm and the excitement. I'm going to say something about the policy subcommittee that my fellow committee members, you may disagree with me, but I don't think so. We are in general eager to support an alternative model. And in fact, while we're looking at reforms, I don't think any of us, and again, I'm speaking just for myself, but I believe there's a consensus. I don't think any of us feel that reforms would be sufficient. And in fact, the reforms we're looking at almost depend on having an alternative model. So what I'm driving at is that I personally want to have some input into an alternative model. I would be glad to have your committee and the Alternatives Committee and any other experts on departmental development joining your committee to propose things, bring it back to the full commission so that we can process it. But I really feel, I feel that an alternative department needs the input of the entire commission. And I think there's going to be a lot of consensus. I really feel that way. And I'll stop at this point and allow other people to speak if I've gone too far for my own committee.
All right, thank you. So David and then Namdi.
Yeah, Dan, I agreed with a lot of what you were saying, and I too agree. My instinct is we need a new department, but I liked where you went with that in terms of some things may not neatly fit into that. So to that extent, I kind of feel like we're putting the cart before the horse here. I think we need to be thinking about what is it that we need to, that the police now do that we need to remove from the police. You correctly identified that I have taken this interest in traffic. And I have to tell you, despite having been a criminal defense lawyer for 40 years, I never really thought about taking traffic away from the police until I became involved in this commission. And now I've become kind of obsessed with it. And I'm somewhat frustrated that we haven't really talked about that a lot within this commission. I was the one last night that asked the chief, I said, you know, Chief, how do we account for the fact that despite all the training, all the hiring practices, that Black people still get killed by police officers in the course of traffic stops? Why do you think that is? And as somebody alluded to earlier, I think it was Nandi, she kind of threw up her hands and she said, I knew you were going to ask this question and I've been thinking about it and I don't know the answer. Well, there is an answer. And the answer I wanted her to give me is that it's because racism is so firmly is such a part of our national psyche. It is so firmly embedded in our psyche that you can't educate and train your way out of it. So the only thing you can do is to reduce the number of times that people of color, and frankly, all of us, regardless of color, have to interact with an armed person. And that's why I am so, and I'm talking about police killings and not even talking about the thousands of microaggressions a day in these police motor vehicle operator contacts. So anyway, as I said, I'm somewhat obsessed with this. I'm sure I'm sounding like I'm somewhat obsessed with it, but your point, Dan, I think was well taken. I'm not sure that that fits into a new Department of Community Care. Within my subcommittee, I have raised the idea that, look, we already have a parking department here that does things that police do in other communities. Maybe there is room to expand that, stop calling it a parking department, maybe we call it the transportation department, and incrementally add to their work. In other words, next year they start handling minor traffic accidents. The year after that, they start handling traffic enforcement of at least the majority of traffic offenses. Anyway, I don't want to hog a lot of time talking about this now because I don't think it's necessarily the time or place. But I do think that I suspect that there's no one on this commission who doesn't feel that we need a new department. The real issue is what's going to go under it. And I think to answer that, we need to have some conversation about what is it that we have consensus on should be removed from police control.
All right. And no, I think that's really good, and that's something that we'll have as like a follow-up for topics. So next would be Namdi and then Alex.
So I agree about most of what's been said about a new department, and thank you, Michael, for doing the legwork and others for commenting on it. You know, I do think that as a general matter, having an entity in the city whose main job it is to think about minority needs, to me makes a lot of sense. You know, it's in governing, it's easy to think about the majority and to try to, you know, in a democratic system, it's sort of easy to kind of gear policy towards most people. And I think you need to have you need to sort of, the whole reason to have like affirmative action and these other entities that are about minority rights is to really kind of think about the needs of the marginalized, the sidelined. And so I would definitely want whatever this group is to have a broad view, not just about race. Race is obviously quite important, but also houselessness and all the various other things that people have raised. So just want to endorse that. And I also agree that probably as conceived, we would need to have, it's not clear that all the things we want would fit in the same entity. I just want to bring up two things that came out of the policing the meeting yesterday with the chief that are sitting in the back of my mind. One of which I think will be uncontroversial to most of you. The other one I'm not certain is true, but we should find out. So the first has to do with the point the chief made about one of the reasons that the police find themselves involved in so much business that we might argue is none of their business and gets them into trouble. And the answer is that they're 24-hour 7 service. And so when stuff goes wrong at odd hours, they're the ones you call. So I would think whatever new entity we create that's going to replace policing, we have to take seriously the idea that it needs to be available all the time. And I think that has some interesting policy implications. I mean, I'm sorry, financial implications, actually, that the chief also alluded to about having shifts and having to staff things that go 24/7. So that's not my expertise at all, but I just want to put that out there because to me, it has some sort of implications for that. And then secondly, and this is sort of related, she said something that I found really provocative, and I'd love it if anybody here can speak to this and offer a learned opinion. She said that even if the police got totally out of everything but like serious crime, they would still need a minimal sort of department. Like she talked about a shift, and I don't know what the number is, but I thought she said something like she would need 5 officers to be able to be present at all times to deal with certain kinds of emergencies. And that would cost a certain amount of money that you couldn't. So if we went to defund or reduce the amount of money from the police, she just could not run even a bare bones police to respond to even crises under that circumstance. I thought that was provocative, interesting, and we ought to know whether that's true. Like, is there a floor that we just can't go below in terms of funding to have a minimal crisis response kind of department in our town? So if anyone knows more about this and can speak to it, I would love to hear about it. But I think it would drive some of our decisions about budgeting, where money is going to come from, and how we do things practically. So thank you for that.
All right. So Alex, and then Booker, and then I'll throw myself in just as a response, but also to wrap things up, being conscious of time.
Okay. Thank you, Namdi. That last point is one that I have wanted an answer to, and some of the alternatives questions that we have for the chief for tomorrow night will reflect on that. So I hope we can get more information. And so going back to David's point about traffic, so the alternatives committee, I think at some point, probably not tomorrow, but perhaps the following week, we'll be discussing proposals for priorities about what the department would take care of, and phases. So say for this year, or what are the highest priorities and what could fit in for this coming fiscal year and then future ones. And so David, I would invite you, if you could at some point, maybe we could talk in the alternatives committee a little bit more in depth about traffic. I think that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So next up is Booker.
So by the way, that's correct. And by the way, if all of you haven't gotten to watch the interview with Chief Casper from last night, you should watch it. It was actually quite moving about her own personal, how much she cares and how much she's interested in reform. But the things that she was surprised about and didn't know about were also quite interesting. So, but I recommend looking at that. I think if we're going to going ahead with having some kind of structured organization to look at things, it would be better if it began its work in a smaller group. If, of course, it needs to come to the larger committee, but I think it's easier to get this kind of stuff done when you start in a smaller committee. I think it was Alex who actually suggested that something like this would be the safety committee. So it's both about health, but it's also about traffic. It's about mental health. It's about housing. It's about safety. And I'm not sure. I'm always afraid that when you put things under health, health is important, but it's not always important. And I would want such a group to be placed someplace where it actually might have meaning and power. Actually, what I care about is power. But I think we need to think hard about where that would be and how that would be. I'm more than glad, because Dan, you come up with great ideas, and if you want to keep pitching the ideas to all of us, but I think it might also be useful if you could bounce it around with 4 people, which would unfortunately require another subcommittee in order to do that.
Yeah. I'm not going to volunteer for another subcommittee, at least at this time. I do not have that capacity. I am running out of spoons. I have too much on my plate. Whatever metaphor you want to use for I need sleep. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've done pretty well, and I won't talk more, just that I think we've done pretty well, but we can improve on, is just any commissioner can attend other subcommittees and still listen in and still make comments, public comment and things like that. So depending on how we want to structure these, and this is a great time to maybe have joint subcommittee meetings or things like that as well. So I want to call on Javier, and then Josie, I see your hand, and I'm going to assume you're going to talk about the spending and contracts in terms of staffing, and then again to be mindful of time too. Javier, did you?
No, I'm good to go.
Okay, awesome.
Cool. First, hey Carol, it's good to see you. Glad to see you. Yeah, I would be careful. Many times we tend to go to the extremes when we get nervous in relation to money, and to sort of to cause some reaction or some defensive effect with people that are listening to us, right? So as far as I know, with the point where we are right now, it's the place that we fully agree, and also based in the document that Cynthia and Dan drafted, that there are services that we don't want the police to have to deal with. By no means, and if I'm wrong on this, I would invite fellow commissioners to correct me on this, but by no means I feel that any of the proposed changes would defund the police. Any. At all. So I would be careful when the person in charge of a department goes to the extreme to try to make a point. I think that's, I understand the sort of the narrative resource of that, but at the same time, I'm worried about the effect of it. And even more because we have heard there are specific people that are worried about, they had talked to us about their safety, what's going to happen if the police is not going to be there. So far, in every single meeting that we had leading to this one, we have agreed to certain measures that by no means would do that. I just want to be really clear with that, right? Because I don't want that narrative to run free. And if we keep doing this, the police department is going to have problems to keep people in different shifts. And no, that's not gonna happen. That's not gonna happen. So that's is what I want to say.
All right, thank you. So I'm gonna go Josie and then Alex. She'll round us out.
Yeah, sure thing. To kind of address Nambi's whole question of if like what is the floor in terms of staffing by Chief Casper's numbers, we as a commission have actually looked into that kind of data, looked into the validity of that, thought of alternative models, and what we've really been exploring in our commission is in terms of that particular idea and that particular thought space is, does it have to be 5 armed police officers? What if some of them were not armed? What if some of those, that base level of 5 are replaced, in fact, with peer responders or EMTs or whatever kind of model an alternative department we might end up proposing, and kind of looking at what the budgetary effect of those changes would be, as well as the quality of service changes that would look like. And so that's just something that our department in particular have been looking at, that sort of idea of a floor on top of the contractual obligation by the city of Northampton to provide a police force. And in fact, there isn't really any law saying that there has to be a maximum or minimum type of staffing for a police force. So it's also something to kind of think about.
All right. Thank you. And so Alex, to round out this.
Great. I just wondered, I can't seem to find the recording of last night's meeting, and I wonder if anyone can point me to that. Or maybe it's not posted yet on Northampton Open Media.
Sometimes takes a while for the recording to be uploaded because, they have a lot going on. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Noah was talking about this earlier, maybe. Noah, do you know, or do you know? Okay, looks like Noah will add the Zoom link so that we can get it to the commission before it's listed on YouTube. They just put in chat that they'll add the Zoom link to the document that we get and share it out. All right. So I think, thank you, everybody. This was super, I feel like this is really productive and really good to sort of get where we are and what people are thinking about. So Cynthia and I will meet and sort of round out and maybe bounce some ideas off each other in terms of how we can facilitate some more discussion around this particular issue. I think the next items that we have are the updates from the subcommittees. So we'll ask for short updates from folks, starting with the alternatives.
I think the most important thing for all of you to be aware of is that we will be talking with Chief Gasper tomorrow. We are having public comment from 7:30 till 8. The chief is supposed to begin at 8 p.m. We're going to talk for an hour, and we've scheduled ourselves 30 minutes afterwards to debrief. I hope if any of you can be there, please be there. And also, of course, we would allow you to participate in our debrief process. Other than that, we've been working on priorities and thinking about writing. As you heard in the public comment, we had a rather intense last meeting. I'm going to ask each of the other members to talk about what that discussion was about. It was a little bit like the beginning of, the closest thing I can say, it's like looking at the first line of the document that was shared with us, and sort of what kind of feelings you get when you read that first line, and why that makes you upset and unsettled. Even if you agree with it, it upsets you and unsettles you. So we talked about some similar issues, I think, for ourselves and what's been difficult for ourselves in doing the work of the commission. I'm going to stop there, and I'll let the other members of the Alternatives Committee unmute themselves, and if they have comments, please.
Yeah. First of all, I'm gonna say something that I stated the last Alternatives meeting. I appreciate you, Booker. Really. It sucks that I cannot, grab the phone and have sort of a virtual coffee with you to be able to talk. It sucks. Badly sucks. And just to clarify, when we talk about sort of an intense conversation, it was incredibly productive, incredibly honest, constructive. Hopefully, if Noah, if you can send the link to the commission about from the meeting, that would be great. I would invite you to watch it. Yeah, I honestly, I would invite you to watch it because I can try to describe it, but it's not gonna be fair to the meeting. I want to say that I appreciate everybody. I appreciate Alex. I appreciate Carol, and I admire Booker deeply.
I remember in that conversation feeling and also expressing that I too feel somewhat inhibited by our process and the way we do our business, because in the past I've often worked in, movement organizing where people got to know others more intimately and holistically, and that I regret that. But be that as it may, that's what we have here. And I remember speaking to my discomfort with what goes on, across the country, everywhere, and the commission is not is a part of this unconscious, I guess, unconscious bias or implicit bias can exist, even in a body like this, and that I felt like, and I still feel like we're inhibited in addressing that when it comes up, when unconscious, regretful feelings are expressed, and they're hurtful of others who are members here. We don't seem to have a mechanism to be able to address that. But in the meeting that Booker referenced, those of us who were there did speak pretty openly, and in some cases with vulnerability. And for me, how that worked is that I felt more connected with my subcommittee members.
Yeah, I'd fourth the things that everyone else said, and just really appreciate you all, and kind of coming to terms with being an elected official and being accountable and representing 4,000 people in the city, and trying to have deep, honest conversations can be a challenge. And I'm glad we were able to have some of that. I think that's all I'll say now, just because of time.
All right, thank you all. So we'll jump on to the LMNOP, so the Outreach Committee first, and then Policies and Services. Not going to forget this time.
Thanks, Dan. So the Outreach Subcommittee wasn't able to meet last week, mainly because I ended up having to present in a panel about immigration in Springfield, and has been sort of a struggle to try to schedule the meeting. Hopefully we're going to be meeting this Saturday after 2. We still need to finalize and I need to get clarity from Dan as a chair of the commission in relationship to the online survey and how that would be dealt with. So that's where we are right now, and hopefully, I really hope that for the last public hearing that we're gonna be able to, with weeks before, to deploy all what we have working and creating to be able to reach affected communities.
And just as a surprise happy update for that, Noah and I were able to meet with someone from the city today. We finally got through, we got a meeting, and we have an idea of what'll work going forward. So we'll have something for Saturday. Finally, yay. Next on the list is the policies and services. Nick, do you want to give us a quick update?
There's not a whole lot to say. I mean, everybody knows we met with the chief last night. It was I would say it was a productive meeting. We haven't processed it at length, although some of the key points were mentioned tonight. And if anybody else wants to add anything to that, you're welcome to.
I'll just add one piece. One of the questions that we put to the chief was to let us know of any inaccuracies in the interim report that she was concerned about. And she did give us a lengthy list of concerns of things that she found to be inaccurate. And again, I think we should revisit those as a commission and decide, see if we agree that these mistakes or inaccuracies, or if we don't, that's fine. But I think just we should have the integrity to make sure our facts are straight. So I will be happy to kind of summarize that for the group.
All right, no, I think that's a great idea to go back. All right, and then the last group is the spending, contracts and spending. Spending and contracts, there we go. So Josie, do you want to give a quick update?
Yeah, sure. So we've been looking at a lot of kind of models for being able to display data from what we've gathered. In our next meeting, we'll be covering kind of the allocation of the initial kind of cut, what it might look like to kind of fund the potable water access and inside clean bathrooms and those kinds of things that we talked about here in the commission. Also, we were going to discuss sort of what are the costs and estimates and process for building a new department, if that is in fact an avenue that we see ourselves traversing down, which hopefully it is, given all the wonderful data out there about doing so. And yeah, that's kind of like a little short thing. If anyone else in the commission wants to add anything, or committee.
All right, so with that, I think we've had a really great set of discussions. It hasn't just been one, but that gets us through all of the updates. So I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, Noah, can you count us out?
Yes. 1 second. Here we go. Booker.
Ooh.
Oh.
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Alex.
Yes.
Javier.
Yes. Sorry.
Namdi.
Yes.
Michael.
Yes.
Josie.
Yes.
Cynthia.
Yes.
And Carol.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody.